My daughter-in-law forgot her cell phone in my house. It rang, and when I picked it up, I froze. On the screen was a photo of my husband smiling alive, though he had been buried 5 years ago. The message said Tuesday again. Same time. Can't wait to hold you. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. The coffee on the counter went cold. For a second, I thought maybe it was a cruel mistake. Maybe someone reused his number. But then I saw the sender's name, her name, and the truth hit me harder than death ever did. I lost my husband twice that day, once to the grave and once to her. But before I share my story with you, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments so I know you're listening, or let me know where you're watching from. I love to see how far my story can reach. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If stories like this touch you, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Every story we tell carries a piece of someone's heart. Today, it's mine. My name is Delara Calloway, and this is how I learned that some betrayals don't end with death. I had already poured 2 coffees out of muscle memory, the first for me, the second for a man who'd been in the ground 5 years, when the faint insecty buzz came from the front hall. Early autumn light sifted through the lace curtains of my farmhouse kitchen, laying a soft pattern across the worn oak table Rowan built. Beyond the window, the Blue Ridge rolled in a misted hush, and a late-season honeybee knocked itself against the screen, frantic to get in out of the cold. Sloan had just left all neat scrubs and perfect hair, saying she was running late for a Tuesday thing, and I was rinsing the empty second cup when the buzzing insisted again. I dried my hands on my apron and followed the sound to the sideboard. Her phone lay there, face up, breathing light. I meant to ignore it. Then it lit, and my husband looked up at me. Rowan, smiling in a purple shirt I'd never seen, standing somewhere sunlit and unfamiliar. For a heartbeat, I thought the grief had finally cracked my vision. Then the message slid over the smile, Tuesday again. Same time. Can't wait to hold you. My fingers moved before my ethics could stop them. I shouldn't have opened it, I knew that, like I knew the Lord's Prayer. But Noah's birthday had been Sloan's passcode for years. 4 digits, a soft click, and the room tilted. The thread wasn't a single cruel text. It went back months, years. Little notes that sounded like breathing between 2 people who no longer waited to speak out loud. Wear the purple dress I love. Thank you for last night. Your husband suspects nothing. We're safe. Mixed in were other lines colder. Make sure the old woman doesn't see us. She's sharper than she looks. I was the old woman. My name stripped down to age and inconvenience. I scrolled with a hand that didn't feel like mine, and there it was, a photo of Sloan in Rowan's old flannel laughing under the rafters of my apple barn. In the background, the rectangle of my bedroom window cut the frame like a wound. The timestamp was from the summer before he died. I opened a hidden folder I found by accident, and my breath went thin. Dozens of shots, their shoulders touching on my porch steps. His arm around her waist under the trellis, Rowan trained his favorite place to sit with evening coffee, and then a set that looked nothing like our farm water, bright as metal, a low green roof pines combing the sky. I pressed the info button and saw the little blue pin land near Lake Lure. That was when the doorbell rang. My hand slid the phone into my apron pocket. I took a breath that felt like it scraped my ribs and opened the door to Sloan's best smile. I'm so scattered today. She laughed, stepping past me on a ribbon of perfume I knew too well from Rowan's collars in those last months. Did I leave my phone? She searched hard, efficient opening drawers that didn't make sense, peering into the bread box, lifting towels like clues might hide beneath the terry cloth. Maybe you took it with you, I said gently. Could be in your car. And she paused just long enough to let me know she'd seen the bulge in my apron pocket. We looked at each other, and neither of us blinked. I'll check. She said, smile steadying like a blade. At the door, she touched my arm, light, practiced. Text me if you find it. When her SUV slid back down the gravel, the kitchen felt colder. I stood at the window, the phone hot against my hip, the second coffee cooling untouched. Outside, the honeybee beat itself against the mesh and fell, and I understood it wasn't the only thing lost inside this house. I wasn't ready to call Adrian. I wasn't ready to hear my son's voice break around the words I suspected. The questions rose like a bruise. What really took Rowan his heart or someone else's hand, and when exactly had I become the harmless old woman they believed I was? I gripped the counter until my hands stopped shaking, then turned off the second cup and let it pour down the drain. That night, the orchard went quiet the way only mountain fields do, a hush that makes every small sound ring like glass. I took Sloane's phone to the little reading room off the hall where Rowan used to spread the tax folders each spring. The brass lamp threw a small circle of light. Crickets worried the dark outside. I plugged the phone into my laptop the way Noah taught me during lockdown and let the machine drink everything, messages, photos, voice memos, call logs until the progress bar sighed done. I copied a second set to a thumb drive, slid the drive into the hollow of an old contracts book Rowan never opened after he retired, and pushed the book back into the shelf with the others. A new lock to a new door. I read. First, the Rowan Sloane thread from the early days, cautious, then hungry. You make me remember what it is to be wanted. Maggie looks at me like I'm already gone. It stung. I let it. Then the photos in order, a rhythm that didn't lie Tuesdays. Always Tuesdays, same hour, same vanishing act. My porch, my barn, then the lake house with the green roof again and again. When I opened a message to check the metadata, I saw the GPS crumbs I needed, the pattern the guilty always leave because desire is sloppier than planning. I started a timeline on a legal pad 5 to 6 months before his collapse. Everything accelerated: more images, more texts, notes about switching suppliers, and don't forget his pills before dinner. Between their intimacy were other messages colder, signed by a single letter T. They started 2 months after the funeral and read like a torch being picked up mid-race. I can give you everything he couldn't. I'm younger, stronger, and I won't die on you. The cruelty of it tasted metallic on my tongue. I pushed back from the desk and pulled the family ledger from the drawer where I keep the boring life. In the column, Rowan labeled medical a series of payments to Pioneer Mutual, slid by my eye like minnows. We hadn't carried a big life policy. At least I never signed one. But here were premiums, and one refund entered the week of the funeral tagged as clinic fees. I took a photo of the page and sat with the ledger in my lap until the weight of it felt like a person. Back on the phone, the other thread, Sloane with tea, was all arrangement and appetite. Keep his shirts at the cabin. I like sleeping in them. Same place as always. Make sure the old woman doesn't see us. She's sharper than she looks. I stared at that line until the words lost their skin. The old woman. It wasn't just insult, it was a working assumption, the flaw in their plan. Underestimate me and save me the trouble. I paused to think about the law so I didn't burn my case down with my anger. North Carolina asks consent for recordings in ways that can tangle the truth if you get sloppy. Secretly taping them now would give their lawyers a blade. If I wanted their words to stand, I had to make them speak where the rules could hear. Two-party consent, visible witnesses, clear notice. I wrote that down too in my own careful hand, next to a list track, the cabin deed pull bank statements around the hospital. Weeks ask Adrian if he's seen charges he can't explain. Then another line, stark and necessary, do not confront Sloane yet. Let her believe she is winning. When the laptop finally ejected the phone, I powered it down and slipped it back into the apron pocket I'd hung on a hook by the door. If she wiped it remotely, my copies would remain. If she came back looking for it, I could smile the way she had and say I'd help her look. The brass lamp made a slow halo on the desk. The rest of the room was dark as the inside of a trunk that hasn't been opened in years. I turned the light off and stood there a moment, letting the black hold me. Somewhere inside that dark was a shape I recognized, a woman I had been before I loved a man who disappointed himself and me. I would not be her again, but I would borrow her patience. Upstairs, I checked the locks, the windows, the drawer where I keep a little pistol I hadn't touched since Rowan died. On the way back through the kitchen, I stopped at the coffee maker and rinsed the second cup clean. In the window, the orchard lay silvered under the moon. The bee was gone. The mesh was still. I laid my palm on the glass and felt nothing but cold. Tomorrow, I would find out who T really was. Tomorrow, I would follow the blue pin back to the water and the small green roof. Tonight, I put the ledger on the table, set the thumb drive in its paper grave, and told the house out loud what I hadn't said in 5 years. I am not the old woman you think I am. Then I went to bed, and for once, the silence didn't scare me. It sounded like a lid waiting for the right pair of hands. I left before sunrise, the mist still clinging to the hollows, the kind of pale blue that blurs the line between sky and mountain. The road out of Asheville twisted like something alive, US 74A, cutting through wet ferns and patches of red leaves that had already fallen. I'd followed Sloane before quietly from a distance, pretending my errands led the same way. But that Tuesday, I wasn't guessing anymore. I wanted proof. Her taillights flashed ahead of me for a few miles, then disappeared around a bend. When I reached the fork, she had turned off the main road, then turned again 10 minutes later. She was trying to shake whoever might be behind her. I slowed, waited for a truck to pass, and followed the reflection of her rear window in puddles, just enough to keep her in reach, but not in sight. The last stretch led down toward Lake Lure. I recognized it from the blue pin I'd seen in the photo metadata, the same gray water, the same tree line that caught the sky in its branches. I parked half a mile back and walked along the shoulder until the cabin appeared through the trees, small, dark wood, the porch sagging a little. The driveway held her car, and beside it, a black pickup truck with mud caked around the tires. I took out my phone, zoomed in, and captured the license plate. Then I waited. Through the binoculars, I watched Sloane unlock the front door, step inside, and reappear moments later with a man behind her. Broad shoulders, heavy jacket, the shape of someone who carried authority even when silent. They moved easily together. I took photos, her hand on his arm, the 2 glasses of red wine on the railing, the flannel shirt hanging over the back of a chair. When they went inside, I crept a few steps closer through the trees. From a narrow angle between the shutters, I saw the wall above the mantel, a framed picture of Rowan younger, smiling. Someone had written under it in black marker, "To the life that could have been." The sight made my throat close. I took a photo, zooming in until the glass glare cut across his face like a scar. Then I backed away, heart pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. The water was flat and gray windless, the world holding its breath. I wrote down the time, 1:43 p.m., and marked it on my pad under Tuesday. Another Tuesday. Another meeting. Back in the car, I drove slowly, eyes on the rearview mirror. At the curve before the main road, the pickup pulled out behind me. I kept driving, pretending to fumble with the radio. When I checked again, the truck was closer, and for a second, the man's face flashed in the mirror. Dark hair streaked with silver jaw, strong, something familiar in the eyes. My chest tightened. He looked like Rowan's people. When I got home, I went straight to the old photo box from the funeral, the one Adrian hated me keeping. I spread the prints across the table. Cousins, uncles, all the Maddox men from Rowan's mother's side. There he was, Carver Maddox. He'd stood a few feet behind the casket that day, hat in hand, barely 35. A former contractor, the one who helped repair the barn roof the summer before Rowan died. The same man who had disappeared right after the funeral, saying he had business out west. I pinned his photo to my corkboard above the desk and wrote one letter next to it, T. Then another note, Pioneer Mutual Connection. Access to medical records. Outside, the light was fading into a dull silver. I sat by the window, the mountains darkening against the sky, and replayed every sound of the day, the click of my camera, the wind, the silence that followed. Some people keep pictures of the dead to remember. Others keep them to protect what they stole. No one frames a ghost in their lover's home unless the ghost still owes them something. On the drive back up the ridge, that thought stayed with me. People don't worship the dead without reason. They do it when the dead have left behind a key. By the time the rain returned, the orchard had gone quiet again, leaves plastered against the windows. I spent the morning sorting through Rowan's old things, pretending I was cleaning, really just looking for something that would explain what I'd seen. The doorbell startled me, a hard, official knock. When I opened it, Adrian stood on the porch, raincoat, dripping eyes darting over my shoulder as if expecting someone else. "Mom, we need to talk," he said. He looked tired, the skin under his eyes darker than I remembered. Sloane's been gone every Tuesday for months. Says she's training nurses in Charlotte, but her mileage reports don't match. And yesterday I saw something on our bank statement, a transfer from Pioneer Mutual Insurance. I thought Dad's account was closed. I felt the air go thin. I told him about the phone, about the pictures, about the cabin by the lake. He didn't interrupt, just stared at the floor and rubbed his wedding ring. "Jesus, Mom," he whispered when I finished. "We can't go to the police yet. We need proof." We decided to gather what we could quietly check the ownership of the cabin, track the license plate I'd photographed. He promised to be careful. He promised not to confront her. But as he was leaving, a police cruiser rolled up the drive lights off, wipers slapping. A woman stepped out, trenchcoat hair pulled back tight. Mrs. Calloway, Detective Alana Mercer, Buncombe County Sheriff's Department. She waited for Adrian to step aside before showing her badge. "I'm here because we received an anonymous tip concerning your husband's death." The room tilted again, like the day I saw that first message. "What about it?" I asked. "The letter claims you administered a lethal dosage of heart medication to Mr. Calloway," she said carefully, "allegedly to collect a life insurance payout." Adrian made a sound like he'd been hit. Mercer continued, voice even reading from a folder. "We're reopening the case. Mission Hospital still has preserved tissue samples. The coroner will re-examine the cause of death." I felt my legs go weak but kept my voice steady. "Who sent it?" The note was typed, but the envelope was handwritten, old-fashioned cursive. "Your address correct down to the mailbox number." She paused. "It was mailed from a public terminal near Mission Hospital. Sloane worked there." The thought said itself. I didn't need to speak it. After Mercer left, I sat at the dining table with Adrian. He was trembling, angry, and frightened. "She's setting you up," he said. "She wants to make you look guilty before anyone looks at her." I went to Rowan's old desk, pulled out the spiral notebook where he'd tracked his medications. The pages smelled faintly of the cedar drawer they'd been locked in. Most of the notes were his careful handwriting until halfway through the last month. Then a different hand appeared, tighter, rounder, signed with initials. SW. The prescription numbers had been altered too, the ink darker over lighter gray. 3 months before his death, the supplier changed from the pharmacy we'd always used to one near the hospital. I held the page up to the light, and the date shimmered under correction fluid. Adrian leaned over my shoulder. "Digoxin," he said quietly. "That's heart medicine. You didn't give that to him, did you?" "No," I said. "I never touched it." Outside, the rain hit the tin gutters hard. I imagined Sloane at her office desk smiling that polite, distant smile while an investigation built itself around me. Someone had built the perfect crime and the perfect scapegoat. They'd taken everything, Rowan's life, his insurance, even my reputation, and turned it into their shield. Adrian clenched his fists. "We have to clear your name. We go to Mercer tomorrow, show her the records, the handwriting." "Not yet," I said. "If Sloane thinks I'm scared, she'll run. Let her think the old woman's cornered. That's when people start talking." I placed the notebook beside the family ledger, both open like witnesses waiting to be called. The rain kept falling, and the photograph of Rowan above the mantel caught the light from the fire. His eyes looked different now, tired, as if he'd known all along that peace wouldn't hold. I whispered to him, "If you were here, would you tell the truth or keep it buried?" The house didn't answer. Only the ticking of the clock filled the space marking time between the living and the dead. The next morning, Asheville was gray and cold, the kind of light that made everything look like a photograph left too long in a drawer. Adrian picked me up before 8. We didn't talk much on the drive downtown, just listened to the windshield wipers mark time against the silence. Graham Brennan's office sat in a tall glass building above Pritchard Park, sterile and professional, a world away from the soil and rain of the orchard. Inside, the lawyer's assistant led us to a room lined with file cabinets. Brennan, in a gray suit that smelled faintly of old paper and cologne, shook my hand with polite curiosity. "You said you're looking into your late husband's estate." "Yes," I said. "Rowan Calloway. He passed 5 years ago. I need to confirm if any recent amendments were made." He tapped a few keys, adjusted his glasses, and frowned. "That's strange. We received a supplemental filing about 3 months ago, a new document related to the Rowan Memorial Trust." Adrian sat forward. "What trust?" Brennan opened a folder and slid it across the table. The paper was crisp, almost new. This was submitted to Pioneer Mutual and copied here for verification. It lists Carver Maddox as the trustee and Sloan Whitaker as consultant. He hesitated. "The stated beneficiary is future descendants of Rowan Calloway. It appears to be a charitable trust, a family scholarship fund." I stared at the neat paragraphs and felt a dull weight behind my ribs. "Rowan never mentioned this," I said. "Nor would he have," Brennan replied softly, "since this trust was registered 2 months after his death." Adrian swore under his breath. "That's impossible." Brennan turned another page. "Here's the signature. Looks like your husband's, though. I see this line. The ink breaks near the tail like it's been traced or printed over. I'd need forensic confirmation, but it's off." I studied the name, my husband's looping R barely recognizable. The idea of someone copying it so cleanly made me nauseous. Who submitted it? The filing came from an email attached to the Pioneer Mutual account used for the original insurance claim, Brennan said. "Do either of you know a Mr. Maddox?" I nodded slowly. "He's family Rowan's cousin. Then perhaps he'll have answers." Adrian asked to access his father's old account. Brennan gave us temporary login credentials. When we checked, a payment labeled Pioneer Mutual Refund appeared on the day of Rowan's funeral. The amount, $498,000, had gone not to any of my accounts, but to the trust. Brennan sat back. "It's technically legal if the beneficiary exists and no fraud's proven. But it's unusual, Mrs. Calloway. And if the signature is forged, that changes everything." We left with copies of the documents. The street outside was bright but cold, the wind cutting through my coat. As we reached the parking lot, Adrian glanced behind us. "Don't look right away," he murmured. "That black pickup. Same one from your photo." I waited until we turned the corner before checking the mirror. The truck followed 1/2 mile, then peeled off toward the freeway. When we reached the orchard, the sky had already darkened again. I got out of the car and felt the air thicken, that strange sense when the world holds its breath before something happens. Adrian went inside to make coffee. I walked the length of the porch and froze. The door to the apple shed stood slightly open, the padlock hanging useless on its hinge. Inside, nothing looked stolen, but I knew someone had been there. The dust on the table disturbed the smell of motor oil and cold air lingering. By nightfall, I locked every door twice. In the reflection of the kitchen window, I saw the faint glow of headlights on the far ridge. They didn't move, just burned steady through the mist, a single unblinking eye watching from the dark. The storm arrived the next evening, thick and merciless. Rain hammered the roof until it sounded like static. Power flickered twice before the generator kicked in. Adrian had gone home to check on Noah, promising to call every hour. I sat at the kitchen table with the evidence spread around me, the forged trust, the medical records, the USB drive. At exactly 9:14 p.m., my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The message read, "Stop digging or Noah pays the price." My throat went dry. I checked the locks again, one by one. then turned toward the living room where Rowan's wedding photo hung above the fireplace. Something glinted behind the glass. I climbed onto a chair, lifted the frame, and found a pinhole lens wired through the back panel no larger than a pencil eraser. A hidden camera. My stomach lurched. Adrian arrived 20 minutes later, drenched and pale. "They've been watching us," I said. We pulled the device out, opened it, and found a memory card. On the laptop, the first file was me in the same kitchen weeks earlier, opening Sloane's phone. They'd been recording since then. They know everything Adrian said. I called Brennan. His voice came steady through static. "You need to hand the USB over to Detective Mercer right now. If I do that," I said, "they'll wipe everything else. Sloane has access to the hospital systems. She'll delete whatever's left." He paused. "Then what do you plan to do?" "Make them come to me," I said. I drafted an email using a new account addressed to the same Pioneer mutual contact Carver had used. The message was short. "I know what you did to Rowan Calloway. $250,000 wired by noon tomorrow, or the police see everything. I signed it with no name, just an initial. The goal wasn't money, it was to make them panic." An hour later, my phone rang again. The voice was low, male familiar. "You think you're clever, old woman? Meet me at the cabin tomorrow noon. Alone. Bring what you have, and we end this." The line went dead. Adrian grabbed the phone. That was him, Carver. "I know, you can't go. I can and I will. But not unprepared." We set up the small recorder Brennan had mailed weeks before, the kind that announces its own presence to make the evidence legal. I pressed the test button. "This recording is being made for my protection and with full knowledge of all parties." The red light blinked. Adrian would give it to Mercer before noon. I'd wear another hidden copy in my coat. We spent the night planning. He would park half a mile from the cabin, keep his phone line open. If I didn't answer by 12:15, he'd call Mercer. The rest was on me. At midnight, another sound broke the storm, a car engine outside, then silence. I peeked through the curtain. The same black pickup sat at the edge of the drive lights off. A shape moved near the apple trees, then vanished. Adrian loaded the small handgun from the drawer, but the truck was already gone, its tires leaving mud scars down the hill. The rain didn't stop until nearly dawn. I packed the evidence into my satchel, the forged trust, the ledger, the prescription pages, the USB. On the table lay the recorder and the old pistol, their metal catching the first dull light. For a long moment I just stared at them both, the weight of choice between truth and safety pressing down. The sky outside was bruised and still dripping when I whispered to no one, "Rowan, if you ever loved me, help me finish this." Then I tucked the recorder into my pocket and slid the pistol into the coat. By morning, the storm had cleared, leaving the orchard glittering with dew. Adrian watched from the porch as I backed the car down the drive. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say, only the sound of gravel under the tires and the echo of my own heartbeat, keeping time with the road ahead. The highway wound through the valley, each curve pulling me closer to the lake and the truth. Somewhere in those quiet hills waited the men and women who thought they'd buried their sins along with my husband. And somewhere between the rain and the silence, I stopped being afraid. I wasn't the old woman in their stories anymore. I was the one coming to end it. Noon made the lake a sheet of dull glass, the kind of light that belongs in an operating room. I parked where the gravel gave up to damp pine needles and walked the last stretch. The recorder in my coat had already spoken its line. This recording is being made for my protection, and with full knowledge of all parties, so a clean copy waited running on its own internal battery. My phone showed no bars the moment I stepped onto the porch. Inside, the air smelled like wet wood and cheap wine. Sloane stood in the kitchen sleeves, rolled hair, perfect as always. Carver lounged in a chair like a man who owned the place. On the table, a pistol, an open bottle, a padded envelope from Pioneer Mutual, and a prescription bottle with its label peeled off. "Let's not drag this out," Carver said. "Sign the note. Take a few pills. We'll drive you home." Tragic but tidy. I let my hands shake. And what exactly am I confessing to? Sloane's smile broke. To doing what you always wanted, cutting him loose. He picked you, not me. He was going to talk. He would have ruined everything. You're saying I killed Rowan because he loved me? I asked, easing into the chair opposite the gun. Sounds like a motive for someone else. Right? Carver snapped. I bent over the paper and began in careful script. I, Delara Calloway. But the words I wrote weren't a confession. They were a transcript. You replaced his medication with digoxin. You filed a fake trust to catch the payout. You planted a letter to frame me. I wrote what they had already implied without noticing times, places, names. The pen scraped slowly, steady enough to make them impatient. Carver leaned over my shoulder reading. His breath went sour. She's playing you. I looked up at him. There's a sealed packet with Brennan. If I don't call by 1 o'clock, he opens it. He has the insurance files, your truck plate, the cabin photos. None of that existed in a single envelope, but the pieces did, and fear is a good binder. He turned on Sloane. You said you wiped everything. I wiped her phone, she shot back. I can't erase a lawyer. Maybe don't forge signatures like a child next time. Forged, I said softly. So the trust wasn't Rowan's idea after all. That cracked something. They began to argue, not whispers, not coded about the schedule, about Tuesday afternoons, about the pharmacy switch, about who told Rowan that I was losing my memory, so he'd accept help with his pills. Carver called her reckless for keeping the framed photo. Sloane called him weak for waiting until after the funeral to move the money. Say it clearly, I said, loud enough to reach the corners. Say what you did. Sloane's chin lifted. We made sure his heart would stop. Slowly. Then one heavy night. His condition did the rest. Thank you, I said. For the record. The tiny LED under my collar, the backup, kept winking red. Sloane's eyes found it. Her hand flashed to the pistol. No one is going to hear anything. The front window exploded before she could aim. Adrian came through in a spill of glass and cold air, shouldering her hard enough to send the gun skittering. Carver bolted for the back, then froze at the sight of deputy jackets flooding the porch. Detective Mercer's voice came clipped, and sure hands where we can see them. Sloane bucked under Adrian, still fighting, still calculating. You think you've won, she hissed at me as the cuffs clicked. He didn't die because of me. He wanted to. He was tired. He chose it. Mercer stepped between us, sweeping the table into evidence bags, the gun, the blank labeled pills, the insurance envelope, the page I'd written on with their words. We've had eyes on this place since morning, she said, glancing at the dead cell signal booster wired under the counter. You were never alone. Outside, the wind moved across the lake like a long breath. By the time they loaded Sloane and Carver into separate cars, my hands had stopped shaking. I sat in the back of Mercer's cruiser Palms, still cold, watching the gray water hold its silence. I didn't see Rowan anywhere in that reflection. All I heard was the roof's thin metal sing under the weather, the sound of something old finally giving way. The person who had poured a second cup every morning ended here. Whatever came next needed only one. Snow arrived 3 months later, soft and indifferent, covering the orchard rows until they looked like sheet music. In court, the sentences landed with the same blunt finality. Sloane took 25 years on murder and fraud. Carver took 15 on conspiracy and document forgery. Mercer sent a letter afterward, neat block handwriting, thanking me for trusting the process, even when the process looked back at me like a suspect. The house was quiet again. Adrian came on weekends with Noah, both of them tracking melted snow across the kitchen tile. We talked less about Sloane as the days stretched. Healing is mostly repetition, school drop-offs, grocery lists, fixing the hinge on the mudroom door. But the past still had its hidden pockets. One afternoon while sorting books in Rowan's office, I noticed the old cedar chair creak in a way it hadn't before. Tucked beneath the seat slat was a single envelope yellowed at the edges, my name written in his hurried hand. I read it standing up as if sitting would collapse me. If you're reading this, I didn't tell you the truth in time. I was weak. I made something I couldn't control, and my shame kept me quiet. I don't know how to fix what I started. Maybe the kindest thing I can do is leave you free. I'm sorry for all the ways I failed to be brave. I carried the letter to the back porch. The orchard looked asleep, every branch a pencil mark against the white. I struck a match and fed the flame to the edge of the page. It curled politely, the words giving up their ink to the air. When nothing remained but black petals in the snow, I felt Adrian and Noah behind me. "You okay, Mom?" Adrian asked. "I'm choosing what stays," I said. "The rest can go." We spent the next week with Brennan setting up the scholarship fund. The money Pioneer Mutual had clawed back from the trust returned to the estate, then moved into a new account with a new name, the Rowan Calloway Scholarship for mountain kids who wanted to study medicine without learning cruelty. It wasn't absolution. It was the best shape I could give to the mess someone else made. That night, I made 1 cup of coffee and took it to the table. No second cup waited to cool beside it. The solitude felt different now, not empty, just specific. Across the room, the mantel held fewer pictures. I'd put away the ones that made the house feel like a test. I kept the ones where Noah was laughing, where Adrian's eyes were clear, where I still recognized myself. Later, Adrian stood in the doorway with his coat on snow ticking at his shoulders. "She asked to see Noah," he said. "The lawyer says she's working the therapy angle. What does Noah want?" He says no. He says he'll decide when he's older. "Then that's the answer," I said. "You protect the child who's here, not the mother who isn't." He nodded and kissed my forehead the way he used to as a teenager when he'd done something foolish and wanted forgiveness. "Thank you," he said, "for not breaking when everything else did." After they left, I walked the rows until the cold pushed heat into my fingers again. Under the snow, last year's windfalls went to sweet rot, feeding roots I couldn't see. It helped to think of growth that way, invisible until it arrives, demanding nothing but patience and a clean season. In the study, the fire dropped to coals. I set the last of Rowan's letters in the drawer and shut it for good. He had not been the man I wanted, but some part of him had known the harm he'd allowed and tried in his quiet, cowardly way to put me outside its blast. That knowledge didn't heal me. It let me stop picking at the same wound. Before bed, I wrote a small check to start the fund, a gesture so modest it felt almost laughable against what we had lost. Yet it was the first thing with his name on it that didn't hurt to sign. In the kitchen, I rinsed my 1 cup and left it to dry. The house ticked and settled. On nights like this, I used to wait for ghosts. None came. Only the steady idea that tomorrow had room in it. People ask if I hate him. I don't. Hate is a leash, and I've been on enough of those. I learned to love myself more than the story I was given to say what needed saying when silence was the easier sin. Snow kept falling quiet as paper. I put on my boots and stepped outside one last time. Under the porch light, the air shone with tiny moving things. My hands didn't tremble when I closed the door. The hill held, the rose held, and for the first time in years, I believed I would too.